It wasn't me who kicked you out. It was your plan that betrayed you.
I'm a 29-year-old guy currently sitting in my apartment right now, the exact same one my ex-girlfriend Rachel attempted to steal from me just last week. I'm still trying to process everything that went down, but I really need to get this entire situation off my chest because it's been consuming my thoughts constantly. We had been dating for approximately 2.5 years total, and we'd been sharing this really nice 2-bedroom place in the downtown area for the past 14 months. It's a great location with excellent natural light, close to restaurants and shops. And honestly, it was perfect for what we needed at the time. When we initially decided to move in together, which felt like a major step in our relationship, I had to cover the entire security deposit of $3,200, plus both the first month's rent and the last month's rent up front. Rachel was currently between jobs at that exact time, so I didn't think twice about covering everything financially. That's what partners do for each other during difficult times, right? I genuinely believed we were building a real future together, and these short-term financial sacrifices would eventually balance out over time once she got back on her feet. Fast forward to this past Tuesday evening. I walked through the door after a particularly long and exhausting day at work, completely tired and ready to just relax on the couch, and I found Rachel sitting in our living room with her best friend Jessica. They had various papers and documents spread out all across the coffee table in front of them, and Rachel looked up at me with this strange, almost triumphant smile that immediately made me feel uneasy. She announced in a serious tone that we needed to have an important talk, and the formality in her voice told me something significant was coming. I sat down carefully in the armchair across from both of them, my heart already starting to race a bit, and Rachel immediately launched into this whole prepared speech about how we'd been growing apart over recent months, and how she desperately needed space to find herself and figure out what she truly wanted from life moving forward. It was all the typical breakup language you hear in movies and television shows, the kind of speech that sounds rehearsed. Honestly, I was hurt by her words, but I was genuinely trying my absolute best to stay calm and handle the situation maturely like an adult. I assumed we'd discuss living arrangements like reasonable people and determine who would move out and establish some kind of reasonable timeline. Then Rachel dropped the real bombshell that completely blindsided me and caught me totally off guard. She announced, in a completely matter-of-fact tone, like it was already decided, that she would be keeping the apartment for herself, and I should probably go crash with my parents for a while until I figured out my next living situation. She even casually mentioned that she'd already taken the liberty of calling my mother earlier that same day without asking me first. And apparently, my mom had told her it was totally fine for me to come stay with them temporarily during this transition. I was absolutely stunned by the sheer audacity and boldness of what I was hearing come out of her mouth. I actually laughed out loud right there in front of both of them, not because anything was remotely funny about the situation, but because I genuinely could not believe the words that were coming out of her mouth. It was one of those shocked laughs where your brain simply cannot process what's happening in real time. I looked directly at Rachel and asked if she was seriously telling me, with a straight face, that she planned on keeping the apartment that I had been personally paying for every single month this entire time we'd lived there. Every rent payment came directly from my bank account. Every utility bill had only my name printed on it. I handled absolutely everything. Rachel responded with this elaborate explanation that she had also been living in the apartment for over a year now, and she desperately needed stability during this difficult transitional period in her life. She specifically pointed out that I had family members nearby who could easily help me out during this challenging time, whereas she didn't have that same kind of support system available in this area at all. She was making it sound so completely reasonable and logical, as if she was actually the sufferer in this entire situation, and I was being unreasonable and selfish for even daring to question her logic. Jessica just sat there beside her, nodding along supportively, like everything Rachel was saying made perfect logical sense, and I was the bad guy here. Here's the critical thing that Rachel had absolutely no clue about whatsoever, and it was about to completely derail her entire carefully planned scheme. The landlord wasn't some random corporate property management company that we'd simply found on a rental listing website like most people do. It was actually my Uncle Richard, who personally owns several residential buildings scattered throughout the city. He had given me a really good deal on this particular place specifically because family members look out for each other, and he wanted to help me out. The official lease agreement had only my name printed on it as the legal tenant. Nobody else's name appeared anywhere on the legal document. Rachel was never officially added as a legal tenant to the lease because when we first moved in together over a year ago, her credit score was absolutely terrible and disastrous from defaulting on multiple student loans several years earlier. The property management software Uncle Richard uses literally wouldn't even process her rental application due to her poor credit history and multiple black marks. She didn't meet any of the minimum requirements whatsoever. I looked directly at Rachel sitting there so confidently and told her that was certainly an interesting plan she had developed, and I would definitely need some time to think carefully about everything she just proposed. I stood up from my chair, walked directly to our bedroom, firmly closed the door behind me for privacy, and immediately pulled out my phone to call Uncle Richard. I explained the entire bizarre situation to him in complete detail, describing how Rachel had just calmly informed me that she was keeping the apartment and I needed to leave and find somewhere else to live. I told him about her calling my mother without my knowledge or permission and making living arrangements for my life as if I had absolutely no say in any of it whatsoever. Uncle Richard was, to put it extremely mildly, absolutely furious when I finished explaining what had just transpired in my living room. He told me he genuinely could not believe that she was actually attempting to kick me out of my own apartment, the one where only my name appeared on the legal lease agreement as the official tenant of record. He actually started laughing in pure disbelief and asked me if Rachel truly understood how rental properties and legal lease agreements actually work in the real world. He seemed genuinely amazed that anyone could possibly be that bold or that ignorant about basic tenant law and how leases function. I explained to Uncle Richard that Rachel had been physically living in the apartment with me for 14 months now, and she most likely assumed incorrectly that meant she had some kind of automatic tenant rights or legitimate legal claim to the property. Uncle Richard immediately and firmly shut down that assumption, explaining to me in very clear and direct terms that she wasn't on the lease and never had been at any point during our entire tenancy. Legally speaking, she had essentially just been my guest for the past year and change. Absolutely nothing more than that from a legal standpoint. She had zero legal standing whatsoever regarding the apartment or any claim to it. Uncle Richard told me he could have formal eviction papers drawn up and filed immediately if I wanted her removed from the premises, and he would personally make sure everything was done completely by the book and legally sound. However, I asked him to please give me exactly 24 hours to attempt handling this situation myself first, to see if I could possibly resolve things peacefully without immediately getting lawyers and courts involved in everything. He agreed to wait, but made it absolutely crystal clear that if Rachel gave me any trouble whatsoever or didn't cooperate, he would handle everything through proper legal channels immediately, and she would be forcibly removed without any further discussion. The next morning, which was Wednesday, I attempted talking to Rachel one more time before allowing things to escalate any further into legal territory. She was standing in our kitchen calmly making breakfast, like absolutely nothing significant had happened the previous evening, casually humming along to some song playing from her phone speaker. She seemed completely relaxed and comfortable, almost like she had already won this battle, and everything was settled in her favor. When I carefully brought up our serious conversation from the night before, she actually seemed genuinely pleased that I'd had adequate time overnight to process everything she'd told me and come to terms with it. She asked me directly when I thought I could realistically be completely moved out of the apartment, suggesting that perhaps by the upcoming weekend would work out well for both of us and give us a clean break. She explained that it would give me several days to pack up all my belongings properly and make proper arrangements with my parents for staying with them. The level of pure entitlement radiating from her was absolutely astronomical and breathtaking. She genuinely believed she had won this situation, and I was simply going to roll over and accept all her demands without any resistance whatsoever. I asked her very directly if she fully understood that only my name was on the official lease agreement for this apartment. She waved her hand at me dismissively, as if I was bringing up some minor technical detail that didn't really matter at all in the grand scheme of things. She confidently stated that we could obviously work all that out with the landlord later on, and she was absolutely certain they would be reasonable about transferring everything over to her name or adding her to the lease once I had vacated the premises. That's precisely when I told her that the landlord was actually my Uncle Richard. She completely froze in place with the spatula still clutched in her hand, halfway through flipping a pancake on the stove. Her face went pale, and she asked me to repeat exactly what I had just said, as if she couldn't have possibly heard me correctly the first time. I explained very slowly and clearly that Uncle Richard personally owned the entire building, that only my name appeared on the lease agreement, and that she had been living here as nothing more than my guest for the past 14 months with no legal standing. Her facial expressions cycled through approximately 5 completely different emotions in roughly 3 seconds flat. Confusion, sudden realization, rising panic, anger, and then back to panic again. She stammered that it wasn't fair at all because she had been living here for over a year and had made this place her home and built her life here. I calmly pointed out that she had contributed exactly $0 toward monthly rent or the initial security deposit during the entire time we'd lived together. She tried arguing that she bought groceries regularly and had decorated the apartment nicely, making it feel like an actual home instead of just a rental. I corrected her faulty memory, explaining that she bought groceries perhaps once per month, if that, and she exclusively used the credit card I had given her that was specifically designated for emergencies only, not regular purchases. Regarding her decorating contributions, she had hung up some mass-produced pictures and cheap wall art purchased from discount home goods stores, all bought using that same emergency credit card that she had been constantly abusing for non-emergency purposes. That's when Rachel started crying, but these definitely weren't sad tears of heartbreak or grief. These were angry, frustrated tears of someone who had been caught red-handed and was watching their entire, carefully planned scheme fall apart right before their eyes. She accused me of being financially abusive and said I was manipulating her by controlling all the money and the living situation. She claimed I was showing my true colors, and this revealed who I really was underneath the nice guy facade I'd been maintaining. I decided right then and there that I was completely done trying to be diplomatic or nice about this entire situation. I pulled out my phone right there in front of her and texted Uncle Richard, telling him to please go ahead and proceed with the formal eviction notice. I wasn't going to waste any more of my time or energy trying to reason with someone who clearly had no intention of being reasonable or fair. The official eviction notice was served on Thursday afternoon at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I was at work during this, sitting in a meeting with my team, but Rachel definitely wasn't working since she'd been unemployed for several months at that point. According to my neighbor Marcus, who works from his home office and sees everything that happens in our building, there was quite an intense and dramatic scene in our hallway that afternoon. Marcus told me later that the process server knocked on our door, handed Rachel the official legal papers, and she completely lost her mind right there in the hallway where all the neighbors could hear everything happening. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about squatters' rights and common law marriage, making these legal claims that made absolutely no sense whatsoever. We don't even live in a state that recognizes common law marriage. And even if we did, we wouldn't qualify under any of the specific requirements anyway. My phone started absolutely blowing up around 2:15 in the afternoon, with a barrage of text messages from Rachel coming in one after another. She was frantically demanding to know what I had done, asking if I was completely insane for giving her only 24 hours notice to vacate, claiming this was illegal and she had rights as someone living there. She said she was calling a lawyer immediately and I couldn't do this to her. The messages just kept coming, one after another, getting progressively more frantic and desperate with each one. Then Rachel's best friend Jessica started messaging me too, sending multiple texts, asking if I was seriously going through with evicting Rachel, and questioning what kind of person does something like that to someone they claim to love. She said Rachel thought I loved her, and this was showing abusive behavior, that I was revealing my true character as a manipulator and controller. Then came a phone call from a number I didn't immediately recognize in my contacts. When I answered, it was Rachel's mother, Patricia, on the line. I had always genuinely liked Patricia throughout the time Rachel and I had been together, so I actually answered this call instead of letting it go to voicemail. Patricia asked what was happening with this story about me throwing Rachel out onto the street. I took a deep breath and explained the entire situation calmly and clearly, from start to finish. How Rachel had tried to kick me out of my own apartment first, how she'd never paid a single dollar toward rent in all our time living together, and how her name wasn't on the lease because of her terrible credit history. Patricia went quiet for a long moment on the other end of the line. Then she said something that really surprised me. She told me Rachel had claimed we'd decided together, mutually as a couple, that Rachel would keep the apartment and I would move out. I firmly corrected that misunderstanding, explaining that no, Rachel decided that entirely on her own and simply informed me I could go live with my parents. There was no discussion or mutual agreement. Patricia paused again, then said that sounded exactly like something Rachel would do, and she'd actually done similar things before. Apparently in college, Rachel convinced her dorm roommate to move out temporarily during finals week, claiming she needed space to study, then changed the locks and kept the entire room to herself. The roommate had to get university administration involved to resolve it. Patricia said she honestly thought Rachel had matured and grown past that selfish behavior as she got older. She apologized and said she'd talk to Rachel about everything. I appreciated Patricia's honesty and willingness to hold her daughter accountable instead of blindly defending her. Friday morning arrived, and Rachel confronted me at 7 o'clock with a thick stack of papers she'd printed out overnight. She announced triumphantly that according to all her sources, she was legally a tenant regardless of whether her name was on the lease, and I was required by law to give her at least 30 days notice minimum. I took the stack and looked through it. Every single document was from a different state's tenant law website. California, New York, Texas, Florida, none from our actual state. I explained these applied to actual legal tenants who signed leases and paid rent, not guests who overstayed their welcome. Rachel insisted that the simple fact of receiving mail at the address made her a legal tenant with rights. I pointed out she only got mail here because she used my address without asking for permission first. And the magazines and subscription boxes ordered with my credit card didn't establish any form of legal tenancy. She switched tactics and threatened to call the police, saying confidently they'd side with her once they understood the situation. I calmly told her to go ahead and make that call since Uncle Richard had already prepared me for this exact possibility. She actually followed through and called them. 2 officers arrived at our door around 9 o'clock that morning. Rachel rushed to answer, tears already streaming down her face, telling them I was illegally evicting her and she lived here and had rights. The older cop, who looked like he'd dealt with this exact scenario many times before, asked if she was on the lease. She said no. He asked if she'd been paying rent. She admitted not technically, but tried to explain she contributed in other ways. He asked if the legal tenant had formally asked her to leave. She sobbed even harder, saying it wasn't fair and she had nowhere to go. The younger officer examined the eviction notice that had been served the previous day, confirming it was from a licensed attorney and had been properly served according to legal procedures. He told Rachel she needed to make arrangements to vacate the premises by 2 o'clock that afternoon, which was the deadline clearly stated in the notice. She asked desperately where she was supposed to go on such short notice with nowhere lined up. The older cop looked at me with something resembling sympathy and told Rachel plainly that figuring out her living arrangements wasn't my problem or responsibility. He told me that if Rachel wasn't completely moved out by the 2 o'clock deadline, I should call them back and they would return to enforce the eviction order. After the police officers left our apartment, Rachel's whole entitled attitude completely crumbled and was replaced by desperate, panicked bargaining. She asked if we could please talk about this like reasonable adults and work something out together. I reminded her that we'd already tried that approach when she told me to move back in with my parents. She claimed she'd been emotional in the moment and didn't actually mean it the way it sounded. I asked her to explain exactly how she did mean it then, and she couldn't come up with any answer whatsoever. She just stared at me with this helpless expression. By noon, she was frantically making phone calls trying to find somewhere, anywhere, to stay even temporarily. I overheard her on the phone with Jessica, asking why she didn't have room for her and pointing out that Jessica had an entire couch available. She was begging Jessica to let her crash, just for a few nights since this was an emergency situation. Then she started calling other friends from her social circle, and each conversation became progressively more desperate as person after person turned her down with various excuses. At 12:30, Rachel attempted one final manipulation tactic. She told me that if I went through with kicking her out, she would post everything on social media and tell everyone what kind of person I really was. She pulled out her phone and started typing up a draft post right in front of me, showing me the screen like it was some kind of threat. The draft said something about how she was about to be homeless because her ex-boyfriend was evil and cruel. I suggested she might want to add some context about how she tried to steal my apartment. She stared at her phone for a moment, then deleted the entire draft without saying another word. At exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Uncle Richard showed up at the apartment with 2 professional movers he'd personally hired for this occasion. He told me he wanted everything handled professionally and by the book. Rachel's stuff honestly wasn't that much when you got down to it. Clothes, shoes, makeup, and beauty products, some books, and the gaming setup I'd bought her as an expensive Christmas present. The movers efficiently had everything boxed up and ready to go in under an hour. One of the movers asked where they should deliver everything. Rachel was sitting on the couch, her phone clutched in her hands, frantically texting people. She said she didn't know where to take her stuff because she didn't have anywhere to go yet. She asked if we could just leave all her belongings here in the apartment until she figured out her living situation, saying it would only be for a few days. Uncle Richard firmly said, absolutely not, and gave Rachel exactly 10 minutes to make a decision. He told her if she couldn't decide, we'd put everything into a paid storage unit, and she'd be responsible for monthly fees and retrieving it herself. She called Patricia, who told her she and Rachel's father were currently in Florida for the entire month and couldn't help. Patricia suggested Rachel call her cousin Rita, who lived about an hour outside the city. Rachel made the call, and Rita wasn't happy about the situation or the last-minute nature of it, but agreed to let Rachel stay with her for just a few days only. She made it very clear this was temporary, not permanent. As the movers were loading all of Rachel's belongings into their truck, she made one final attempt. She asked if I was really going to do this, if I was genuinely going to throw her out like she was nothing but trash. I explained I wasn't throwing her out like trash. I was simply enforcing the exact same boundaries she had tried to set first, that we needed to live separately. The only difference was she had automatically assumed she'd be the one keeping the apartment I paid for. Rachel argued that she was the one who had picked out this specific apartment in the first place and decorated it. I corrected that she picked it from a list of 3 options I could actually afford based on my salary, and she decorated using my credit card. Living somewhere rent-free doesn't make it yours. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, then turned back saying I'd regret this and eventually beg her to come back. I said I'd miss who I thought she was, not who she actually was. The calls started that evening. First was Jessica calling to say Rachel was at Rita's place crying her eyes out, asking how I could live with myself. I replied pretty comfortably in my apartment that I pay for. Jessica called me heartless, saying Rachel loved me. I said she loved my wallet and free accommodation, and when it came time to break up, her first move was trying to steal my home. Jessica insisted she wasn't stealing, just thought she deserved it. I said she thought she could take advantage of me one more time, but thought wrong. Then came a call from an unknown number with Rachel's entire friend group on speaker, multiple voices talking over each other. They told me they all collectively thought I was disgusting for making a woman homeless. I pointed out she wasn't homeless, she was at her cousin's and only there because she tried to make me homeless first. They said it was different because I had support systems. I noted she apparently had support too since they were all so concerned. There was silence, then someone hung up. The best call came Saturday afternoon from Patricia apologizing for Rachel's behavior. She said she'd raised Rachel better than this, or thought she had. Rachel told Rita I was abusive and controlling, but Rita was smart enough to ask questions, and the story quickly fell apart. Rachel had already worn out her welcome at Rita's by demanding Rita's bedroom, because she claimed the couch hurt her back. Rita was driving her to Rachel's uncle's place the next day where he had a basement apartment available, but Rachel would need to actually pay rent. Patricia laughed bitterly, asking rhetorically what money Rachel would use since she hadn't worked in 6 months. Rachel had been telling her parents I was supporting her while she figured out her career path, which was completely news to me, since she'd told me she was doing freelance social media management work. Sunday morning, Marcus texted saying I absolutely needed to see something. He sent screenshots from a group chat his girlfriend was in through knowing Jessica. The messages were from weeks earlier. Rachel wrote that Operation Apartment was almost ready to execute. Someone asked if she really thought I'd just leave without fighting. She responded I was too nice to fight back. She'd cry and play sufferer, and I'd cave like always. Someone asked what if I didn't cave this time. Rachel said she'd threatened to ruin my reputation by claiming I was abusive. I'd give her the apartment to avoid the drama and social fallout. Someone responded calling the plan savage. Rachel said I'd been paying for everything anyway. Might as well get a few more months of free rent before she moved on to her next target. They asked what she meant by moving on. Rachel casually mentioned she was already talking to some guy named Tyler who owned a beach house. She just needed to secure my apartment first as a backup plan in case things with Tyler didn't work out. I sat there staring at my phone screen, reading and rereading those messages. The entire breakup and apartment theft had been calculated and planned out in advance. This wasn't some emotional decision made in the heat of the moment. This was deliberate and premeditated. Marcus texted again saying there was more that his girlfriend just told him. Rachel had actually been seeing Tyler for approximately 2 months already. 2 whole months while I was paying all our bills, buying her thoughtful gifts, and planning what I thought was our future together. I forwarded all the screenshots to Patricia immediately. Her response came back within seconds, saying she was calling Rachel right away, and this behavior was completely unacceptable. About an hour later, Rachel called from a blocked number, absolutely screaming that I'd ruined everything. Her mother saw those messages and was now cutting her off financially. Rita wouldn't talk to her anymore, and it was entirely my fault. I calmly stated that I had ruined her carefully planned scheme to steal my apartment while simultaneously cheating on me. She insisted she wasn't technically cheating because Tyler was just a friend who happened to own a beach house. I told her to stop lying because we both knew the truth now. She threatened to sue me for emotional distress and illegal eviction. I asked what exactly she'd sue for, making her face consequences of her own actions? Good luck finding a lawyer. She hung up. It's been exactly 1 week since Rachel was evicted. She's currently couch surfing between distant relatives who are quickly getting tired of her. According to Patricia, she's burned through 3 family members already by demanding special treatment, refusing to help with household chores, and not contributing anything financially. Tyler ghosted her the moment she became what he called too much drama. Apparently, he only wanted something casual and fun, not a homeless girlfriend with serious baggage. Her friend group is actively fracturing. Some still support her, but many others are starting to see the truth. Jessica actually reached out with a genuine apology, saying she had no idea about Tyler or any of the planning and scheming. She thought Rachel really loved me and was just confused. She apologized for attacking me. The apartment is completely peaceful now. I changed all the locks with Uncle Richard's permission, reorganized every room the way I actually like it, and bought a brand new couch because the old one had too many memories attached. Uncle Richard told me this wasn't the first time he'd seen this exact situation. He said entitled people always think they're smarter than everyone else and genuinely never expect to face real consequences. Patricia sent me one final text yesterday, thanking me for handling everything the way I did. She said Rachel desperately needs to learn she can't manipulate people. She's 27 years old, not 17, and it's well past time for her to grow up and take responsibility. She apologized that Rachel put me through all this. I'm not going to pretend I'm completely over everything. 2.5 years is significant time, and discovering it was essentially all a calculated game to her hurts deeply. But at least I found out now, before marriage or children made things infinitely more complicated. The ironic thing is that if Rachel had just asked to break up normally and given me reasonable time to figure out arrangements, I probably would have actually helped her find a place and maybe even helped with the deposit. But her pure entitlement, her assumption that she could simply take what was mine, and her calculated manipulation eliminated any sympathy I had. To anyone reading this, don't let people exploit your kindness. When someone shows you their true character, believe what you're seeing, and always keep important documents in your name only until you're married. Maybe even then. My apartment is wonderfully quiet now. My bank account is steadily recovering. My self-respect remains intact. And Rachel is finally learning that actions carry real consequences, even if it's a lesson she should have learned years ago. Marcus told me this morning that Rachel tried getting into our building yesterday. She told security through the intercom she'd forgotten her key. The door camera caught her having a complete meltdown when she realized her access fob had been permanently deactivated. Sometimes the most satisfying form of justice isn't some elaborate revenge scheme. Sometimes it's simply allowing someone to face the natural consequences of their own entitled behavior. I'm completely finished with this chapter and genuinely ready to move forward into whatever comes next.